The first thing people noticed about Renee Caldwell was how little they noticed her at all. She moved through the downtown office building before most of the city woke up, when the sidewalks were still damp from overnight street cleaning and the sky hung low and gray over Chicago. At that hour, the glass tower on Wabash Avenue didn't shine. It loomed, quiet, waiting. Renee preferred it that way. She clocked in at 4:58 a.m. every weekday, 2 minutes early, the same way she had for years. The security guard barely glanced up anymore. He knew the sound of her shoes. Soft soles. No hurry. No drag. Just steady. Her badge said facility support. The font was small, the plastic scratched. People called her the janitor, anyway, usually without malice, sometimes without even realizing they were speaking out loud. Renee didn't correct them. Corrections invited conversation, and conversation invited attention. Attention had never been kind to her. She started on the upper floors where the executives worked. 42 floors of polished desks, framed awards, and chairs that probably cost more than her monthly rent. At that hour, the offices smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old coffee. The air was cool, controlled. Predictable. Renee liked predictable. She worked with headphones in but rarely played music. Mostly she listened to the building itself, the low hum of ventilation, the distant ding of elevators, the faint echo of footsteps that weren't hers. Those sounds told her where people were. Or weren't. It was a habit she'd picked up young, back when her mother cleaned houses and brought Renee along on weekends. Neat means invisible, her mother used to say, kneeling to scrub someone else's kitchen floor. Invisible means nobody bothers you. Renee learned early. She learned well. At 42, her hands told the story her face didn't. Calloused palms. Small scars from cracked plastic trash bags. A thumb that never quite bent right after an accident with a mop wringer years back. She stretched her fingers every morning before starting, feeling the quiet ache settle into place like an old roommate. By 7:30, the building began to wake up. Suits appeared. Perfume. Loud voices bouncing down hallways. Renee moved aside when needed, pressing herself into corners with her cart. Some people nodded. Most didn't. She didn't mind. Mostly. On Tuesdays after clocking out, Renee stopped at the same cafe near the Red Line station. It sat on a corner that always smelled like roasted beans and bus exhaust. The barista knew her order without asking. Small coffee. Black. No lid. She paid in cash. Always did. That morning, like every Tuesday, she ordered 2. The second cup was larger. With a lid. She carried them carefully across the street, past the boarded-up pharmacy with faded signs still clinging to the windows. The man sat in his usual spot, back against the brick, shoulders hunched against the cold even though spring was trying to pretend it existed. He looked up when her shadow crossed him. "Morning," he said, his voice rough but polite. "Morning," Renee replied, holding out the cup. For a second he didn't take it. "You don't have to," he said. She shrugged. "I already bought it." That usually ended the conversation. Renee wasn't good with long exchanges before 8 in the morning. Or after. Or ever, really. The man accepted the coffee, fingers wrapping around the cup like it was something fragile. He nodded once, a small gesture, but it mattered. Renee noticed things like that. She sat on the edge of the low concrete planter nearby. Not too close. Close enough. They didn't talk much. They never had. She knew his name was Daniel because he'd told her once, after a few weeks of these quiet mornings. She told him hers only because it felt rude not to. That was the extent of it. No backstories. No explanations. Renee liked it that way. After a few minutes, she stood, brushed her hands on her work pants, and adjusted the strap of her worn shoulder bag. Her bus would be coming soon. Caleb would already be awake, getting ready for school, pretending he didn't worry about her the way she worried about him. As she walked away, she felt Daniel's eyes on her back. Not heavy. Just present. That feeling stayed with her longer than usual. Later, riding the bus home, Renee stared out the window at the city sliding past. People rushing. People struggling. People pretending they weren't. If this story already feels familiar, if you've ever been invisible in a room full of people, you might want to stay with it. Stories like this don't announce themselves loudly. They unfold quietly the way real life does. And if you don't want to miss where it's going, subscribing now makes it easier to find your way back. The bus hit a pothole, jolting her from her thoughts. Renee adjusted her coat and leaned back, unaware that the small routine she'd built, the coffee, the silence, the man by the boarded-up pharmacy, was already beginning to crack. Because some mornings don't stay ordinary for long. Renee's apartment sat above a laundromat that never quite slept. Even in the early afternoon when she finally got home, the floor vibrated faintly beneath her feet. Dryers thumped in uneven rhythms. Quarters clinked. The air always carried a mix of detergent and damp concrete. She used to light candles to cover the smell, but eventually stopped. Candles cost money. And after a while you stop fighting things that don't really hurt you. She kicked off her shoes by the door and set her bag down carefully, like noise itself might cost extra. The couch was already made up with her blanket folded tight at one end. She'd learned to keep it that way. If she let it look temporary, it started to feel temporary. And she couldn't afford that. From the bedroom came the sound of a drawer slamming shut. "Caleb," she called. "In here," her son replied. She stepped into the doorway and leaned against the frame. Caleb stood in front of the mirror, tying his shoes with more force than necessary. He was tall now. Taller than she expected. His shoulders were broader, his face caught somewhere between boy and man, like it hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. "You eat?" she asked. "Yeah." She raised an eyebrow. "Toast?" he added. "And that last yogurt?" She nodded. "We'll grab groceries tomorrow." Caleb glanced at her hands. She noticed him noticing. "You working extra again?" he asked. "Just a longer shift." "That's not an answer." Renee smiled faintly. "It's the one you're getting." He sighed and finished tying his shoes. "You don't have to do everything yourself." She straightened. "I'm not." He didn't argue, but his jaw tightened. That was new. The tension. He was old enough now to see the edges of things. Old enough to feel cheated by them. Renee turned away before the conversation could grow teeth. In the kitchen, she rinsed her coffee mug and set it upside down on the towel. The cabinets were mostly bare, but clean. Clean mattered. Clean meant control. She sat at the small table and opened the envelope waiting there. Electric bill. She skimmed the numbers, then folded it back up slowly as if moving too fast might make it worse. Her phone buzzed. A reminder for rent. She silenced it. When she was younger, Renee used to imagine that adulthood came with some kind of arrival point. A moment where you stood still long enough to breathe. That moment never came. It just kept stretching further and further ahead like a bus stop you were always one block away from reaching. She thought of her mother then. How she'd come home bone-tired but still find the energy to ask Renee about school. How she'd counted dollars at the table with quiet determination, never letting frustration spill over where it could burn someone else. Renee had promised herself she'd do the same. By early evening she headed back out. Tuesdays were long. She worked a second shift at a grocery store 3 nights a week, wiping down carts and mopping floors after closing. It wasn't much, but it was predictable. Predictable paid bills. On the walk to the bus stop, she passed the cafe again. The corner was louder now. Traffic. People. The city fully awake. Daniel wasn't there. Renee slowed without meaning to. She glanced toward the boarded-up pharmacy. Empty brick. A scrap of paper taped to the door flapped uselessly in the wind. She told herself not to think anything of it. People moved. People didn't always stay where you left them. That was just how it was. Still, on the bus ride to her second job, she kept seeing his hands wrapped around the coffee cup. The way he'd hesitated before taking it. The way he'd looked at her like he wasn't sure what to do with kindness anymore. At the grocery store, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Renee pushed her mop down the aisle, the smell of cleaner sharp in her nose. Her body went through the motions easily. Muscle memory was cheaper than thinking. But her thoughts drifted. She wondered where Daniel went when the day got cold. She wondered if he had somewhere safe at night. She wondered why she was wondering at all. Near the end of her shift, her phone buzzed again. A text from Caleb. "You coming home soon?" "On my way," she replied. She clocked out and stepped back into the night, the air cooler now, the city restless. As she waited for the bus, Renee checked the corner one more time, even though she told herself not to. Still empty. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself, a small knot forming in her chest. Not fear. Not yet. Just something unsettled. Something out of place. She didn't know it then, but that absence was the first sign that the quiet balance of her routine was already slipping. And once things start to slip, they rarely stop all at once. The next Tuesday morning came colder than the forecast promised. Renee felt it the moment she stepped outside her apartment building. The air had a sharper edge, the kind that slid under your coat and stayed there. She pulled her scarf higher and headed toward the bus stop, shoulders slightly hunched, breath visible in short bursts. The city was quieter than usual. Even the traffic sounded tired. She reached the cafe just before 6. The windows glowed warm against the dim street, fogged slightly from the contrast between heat and cold. Inside, the same barista stood behind the counter, hair pulled back, eyes half-lidded from the early hour. "The usual?" the barista asked. Renee hesitated. She glanced toward the corner across the street, toward the boarded-up pharmacy. Her stomach tightened before she even knew why. "Yes," she said. Then after a pause, "2." The barista nodded and rang it up. Renee paid in cash and waited, hands tucked into her coat pockets. When the cups were ready, she took them carefully, feeling the heat seep through the cardboard. Outside, the wind cut harder. Daniel sat in his spot. Relief came first, sharp and unexpected. Then concern followed close behind. He looked worse than before. His coat was thinner than she remembered, the fabric worn soft at the elbows. His shoulders were hunched forward, not just against the cold but inward, like he was bracing for something. When he coughed, it wasn't quick. It dragged out of him, low and rattling, the kind of sound that didn't belong outdoors in winter. Renee crossed the street faster than usual. "Morning," she said, holding out the larger cup. Daniel looked up, startled, then smiled faintly. "Morning." His fingers trembled as he took the coffee. She noticed. She always noticed. "You all right?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. He shrugged. "Been better." She sat on the planter again, closer this time. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel the cold radiating from him. "You disappeared last week," she said. He took a sip and exhaled slowly. "Had to move around. Cops don't like folks getting too comfortable." She nodded. She didn't know the rules of that world, but she knew they existed. Invisible lines people crossed without realizing it. They drank in silence for a moment. A bus roared past, spraying slush onto the curb. Daniel flinched slightly. Renee frowned. "You need gloves." He chuckled, a dry sound. "Got a whole list." She reached into her bag without thinking and pulled out a pair of cheap knit gloves. Black. She bought them on sale weeks ago and never used them. "Here," she said, holding them out. He stared at them like they were something fragile. "I can't keep taking from you." "You're not," she replied. They were just sitting there. That wasn't entirely true. But it wasn't entirely a lie either. He hesitated, then took them. Slid them on slowly. Flexed his fingers. "Thank you," he said quietly. Renee shrugged. "Cold's cold." They sat there longer than usual. The city woke around them. Footsteps. Voices. A delivery truck backing up with a loud, impatient beep. "You work around here?" Daniel asked. "Yeah. Early hours." She smiled faintly. "Pays better than sleeping in." He laughed softly, then coughed again. Harder this time. Renee's jaw tightened. "You should see a doctor." He shook his head. "Not that simple." "It never is," she said. She stood, brushing off her pants. Her bus schedule ticked through her head automatically. She was already running late. "I'll see you," she said. "Renee," he called after her. She turned. "I'm not always here," he said. "Just so you know." Something in his tone made her pause. Not apology. Not warning. Something else. Something guarded. "Okay," she said. "I'm not either." She walked away, the second cup empty now, the first cooling in her hand. On the bus she replayed the cough. The gloves. The way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. It bothered her more than she liked. That evening, after her second shift, Renee stopped by a discount store. She told herself she was just browsing, killing time before the bus. She left with a thicker pair of gloves and a scarf. At home, Caleb raised an eyebrow when he saw the bag. "Since when do you buy extras?" he asked. "Since winters keep getting colder," she replied. She placed the items carefully by the door. The next morning, she woke before her alarm. Her chest felt tight, like she'd forgotten something important. Outside, the sky was heavy with clouds. Snow threatened. Not the gentle kind. The kind that stayed. As she walked toward the cafe, Renee had the strange, creeping sense that the line between routine and responsibility was thinning. And once that line disappeared, there would be no easy way back. By the time the snow actually fell, it didn't feel sudden. It felt inevitable. Renee watched it from the cafe window as she waited for her order. Thick flakes drifted down in no hurry, softening the sharp corners of the street, settling into cracks that never stayed filled for long. Chicago snow always started quietly. The trouble came later. She ordered 2 coffees without thinking this time. The barista slid them across the counter and glanced out the window. "Gonna be a rough one." Renee nodded. "Yeah." Outside, the wind had picked up. She crossed the street carefully, boots crunching against the first layer of slush. Daniel was there again, but barely. He was sitting lower than usual, back pressed hard against the brick wall, knees pulled in close. Snow clung to his coat and the brim of the old knit cap he wore. When he looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed, unfocused for half a second before recognition kicked in. "Hey," he said. His voice sounded thinner. Renee handed him the coffee and crouched instead of sitting this time. The concrete was cold even through her pants, but she didn't care. "You should be inside," she said. He smiled weakly. "You offering?" She shook her head, but not dismissively. "Just saying." He took a careful sip, hands shaking even with the gloves. The cough came again, sharper now. He turned away slightly, like he didn't want her to see it. She saw it anyway. "Daniel," she said, firmer. "This isn't just cold." He didn't argue. That worried her more than if he had. They sat like that for a while, snow gathering on their shoulders. People hurried past, collars up, eyes forward. No one slowed. No one ever did. "You always here this early?" he asked suddenly. "Work," she replied. "Yeah, but same place, same time. Every week." She glanced at him. Routine's cheaper than surprises. He smiled at that. A real one, brief but genuine. "You live close?" he asked. "Bus ride. Family?" The question hung between them longer than the snowflakes. "My son," she said finally. 17. Daniel nodded slowly. "That's a hard age." "You got kids?" she asked, surprised at herself. He hesitated. "Had," he said. The word landed heavier than the rest. Renee didn't ask anything else. She knew better. Some answers didn't need prying. They found you on their own schedule. When she stood to leave, the snow had picked up. The street was already slick, traffic crawling. "You gonna be okay today?" she asked. Daniel looked up at the sky. "I'll manage." She reached into her bag and pulled out the scarf. Held it out. His eyes widened slightly. "Renee." "Don't," she said. "Just take it." He did. Wrapped it around his neck carefully, like it mattered. "Thank you," he said again, quieter this time. She walked away feeling something tug behind her ribs. Not guilt. Not pride. Something closer to responsibility. She didn't like that feeling. Responsibility had a way of growing teeth. That night, the snow didn't stop. By morning, the city was buried under it. Renee's alarm went off, and she lay there listening to the muffled world outside. The laundromat downstairs was unusually quiet. Even the dryer seemed tired. She got dressed and checked the weather on her phone. Wind chill warnings. Transit delays. She thought of Daniel. She thought of the way his cough had sounded. She stood in her kitchen for a long moment, staring at the small table, at the envelope with the electric bill, at the grocery list stuck to the fridge with a faded magnet. Then she grabbed her coat. The streets were slow and slushy. The cafe was open barely. She ordered 2 coffees and added a breakfast sandwich without looking at the price. Outside, the corner was empty. Her heart jumped, then scolded itself. He'd told her he wasn't always there. Still she waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Just as she was about to leave, she saw him coming down the block, moving stiffly, each step deliberate. His coat was dusted white, his face pale. "You shouldn't be out," she said as he reached her. "Neither should you," he replied. She handed him the coffee and the bag. He didn't argue this time. They stood there, snow swirling around them, both pretending this was still just a small thing. But as Renee watched him eat with shaking hands, she realized something had shifted. This wasn't just coffee anymore. And she didn't yet know what it was becoming, or what it would ask of her next. The cold settled into Daniel in a way Renee couldn't ignore anymore. It wasn't just the coughing fits that came more often now, or the way his hands trembled even inside the gloves. It was the pauses. The moments where he seemed to drift, eyes unfocused, like he was fighting to stay present. Like the world was asking more of him than he had left to give. That Tuesday morning he was already sitting when she arrived, but something about the way he leaned against the brick made her slow her steps. "You all right?" she asked before even handing him the coffee. Daniel looked up and smiled out of habit. The smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Same as always." She handed him the cup anyway. He took it, fingers stiff. "You didn't answer," she said. He sighed, a shallow sound. "I'm breathing." "That's a start." She sat beside him on the planter, closer than she usually did. The cold seeped through her coat, sharp against her hip. "You eat?" she asked. "Here and there." "That's not an answer either." He chuckled weakly. "Guess we're even." The wind cut down the street, rattling a loose sign above the pharmacy door. Daniel coughed again, harder this time. He turned away, pressing his fist to his mouth, shoulders shaking. Renee waited. She didn't pat his back. Didn't rush him. She'd learned long ago that sometimes attention made things worse. When the coughing eased, Daniel wiped his mouth with the back of his glove. He didn't look at her. "I don't want to worry you," he said quietly. Renee stared straight ahead. "Then stop giving me reasons." That got his attention. He looked at her, surprised then thoughtful. "You ever notice," he said slowly, "how easy it is to disappear in a city this big?" She nodded. "Harder to come back." He studied her face, like he was trying to understand something he hadn't before. "You're not invisible," he said. She let out a short laugh. "You should see my job." He smiled, but it faded quickly. "I had a job once," he said. "A good one." She waited. "I work too much," he continued. "Miss things I can't get back." "What kind of work?" she asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Doesn't matter." That answer didn't satisfy her, but she let it go. For now. They sat there until the cold began to bite too hard to ignore. Renee checked her watch. She was late again. "Listen," she said, standing. "There's a place down the street. Cheap hotel. You know it?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah." "You should think about it," she said. "Just while it's this bad." He looked away. "I can't afford that." She swallowed. "Just think about it." She walked away before he could respond. The rest of the day dragged. At work, her supervisor reminded everyone to watch their hours. Budget cuts were coming. No one knew what that meant yet, but everyone felt it. On her lunch break, Renee checked the weather again. Another storm was coming. Worse than the last. That night, Caleb noticed her distracted state immediately. "You okay?" he asked, leaning against the counter while she reheated leftovers. "Just tired." "You're always tired." She sighed. "That's adulthood." He watched her for a moment, then asked, "You giving money away again?" Her head snapped up. "What?" "You do this thing," he said carefully, "where you help people until it hurts us." Renee set the plate down a little harder than she meant to. "I'm not hurting us." Caleb didn't argue. He just looked at her, the way kids do when they're not convinced but don't know how to push without breaking something. That night, Renee lay awake listening to the laundromat hum below her. She thought about the hotel. About her bank balance. About Daniel's cough. In the morning she didn't bring 2 coffees. She brought 3. One for herself, one for Daniel, and one she didn't plan to drink. When she reached the corner, Daniel wasn't there. Her chest tightened. She waited. 5 minutes. 10. Finally, she saw him approaching from down the block, moving slower than ever. His steps were uneven, his face pale beneath the gray beard. "Daniel," she called. He looked up, relief flashing briefly across his face before he coughed again, bending forward sharply. Renee crossed the street without thinking. "You're not okay," she said. He straightened with effort. "I said I'd manage." She shook her head. "No, you won't. Not like this." He looked at her, then really looked. Something in his expression shifted. Fear maybe. Or acceptance. "What are you saying?" he asked. Renee glanced toward the hotel at the end of the block, its faded sign blinking weakly against the gray sky. "I'm saying you need a room," she said. "Today." Daniel followed her gaze. His jaw tightened. "That's not your responsibility," he said. Renee didn't answer right away, because deep down she already knew the truth. Once you see someone slipping, pretending you didn't notice becomes its own kind of choice. And she was running out of time to decide which one she was going to live with. Renee didn't decide that night. That part mattered to her later when she tried to explain it to herself. It wasn't some dramatic moment where she sat at the table, weighed her options, and chose kindness like a medal to pin on her chest. It was quieter than that. Messier. She came home after her second shift with the cold still clinging to her coat. The laundromat downstairs was louder than usual, dryers thumping like an uneven heartbeat. She stood in the doorway longer than normal, listening, letting the noise fill the space where her thoughts were getting too sharp. Caleb was at the table, bent over a stack of papers. College pamphlets, test prep sheets, scholarship forms he pretended not to care about. A pencil tapped against the wood in a nervous rhythm. "You eat?" she asked. He looked up. "Microwave noodles." "You." "Later." He nodded, then watched her as she hung up her coat. "You're thinking again." She paused. "What makes you say that?" "You get this look," he said. "Like you're arguing with someone who isn't there." Renee huffed softly. "That someone usually wins." Caleb smiled, but it faded quickly. "Is this about the guy?" She didn't ask which guy. She sat across from him instead, resting her forearms on the table. The surface was scratched from years of use, from homework and bills and the occasional argument that ended with someone gripping too hard. "He's not doing well," she said. Caleb leaned back in his chair. "You can't save everybody." "I'm not trying to." "That's what you always say." Renee opened her mouth, then closed it. He wasn't wrong. That was the problem. Later, after Caleb went to bed, she pulled out her bank statements. She spread them across the table like a puzzle she already knew was missing pieces. Numbers stared back at her, indifferent. Rent, utilities, bus fare, groceries. The grocery store job barely covered the gaps anymore. She traced a finger along the balance, then folded the papers neatly. Folding didn't fix anything, but it made it feel contained. In bed, she stared at the ceiling. The faint vibration from the dryers traveled up through the floor, through her bones. She thought about Daniel's cough. The way he tried to stand straighter when she crossed the street, like posture alone could make him stronger. She thought about the hotel. The blinking sign. The idea that warmth could be bought in weekly increments. "You shouldn't," she whispered into the dark. But the thought didn't go away. The next morning, she woke before her alarm again. Her body felt heavy, like it already knew the day would ask for more than usual. She moved quietly, not wanting to wake Caleb, and stood at the sink brushing her teeth while staring at her own reflection. "You're tired," she told it. "That's all." Outside, the cold had sharpened overnight. The kind that made your lungs protest when you breathed too deep. She stopped at the cafe and ordered 2 coffees out of habit. Then she hesitated, fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. "And a breakfast sandwich," she added. The barista raised an eyebrow. "Hungry today?" "Something like that." Renee crossed the street slowly, heart beating faster with each step. Daniel was there, hunched over, shoulders shaking slightly even before the cough came. "Hey," she said softly. He looked up and managed a smile. "Morning." She handed him the coffee and the sandwich. He frowned when he saw the bag. You didn't have to. I know. He took it anyway, hunger winning the argument. He ate slower than usual, pausing between bites like his body needed convincing. You think about that hotel? She asked, keeping her voice casual. Daniel didn't look at her. Yeah. And I don't have that kind of money. She nodded. What if you did? That made him look up. Renee, he said carefully, I don't want. I know what you don't want, she interrupted. I'm asking what you need. Silence stretched between them. The city rushed past, impatient. I need to not be outside tonight, he said finally. Her chest tightened. Not with fear. With clarity. They stood together, both knowing the conversation had crossed into something else. Renee glanced toward the hotel again. The sign flickered, the letter E cutting in and out. I'm not promising anything, she said, more to herself than to him. But let's walk. Daniel hesitated. You sure? No, she replied. But come on anyway. They moved down the sidewalk together, her pace slower than usual, matching his uneven steps. With each block, her mind ran numbers, excuses, consequences. By the time they reached the hotel entrance, her heart was pounding. She stopped just outside the door, hand hovering near the handle. Daniel waited, eyes searching her face, giving her one last chance to turn away. Renee swallowed. Some choices didn't announce themselves as heroic or foolish. They just stood there, quiet and heavy, waiting to be made. And once you pushed the door open, there was no pretending you hadn't seen what was inside. The hotel lobby smelled like old carpet and lemon cleaner that had lost its fight. Renee felt it the moment she stepped inside. The air was warmer than the street, but not comforting. Just contained. The kind of warmth that reminded you time moved differently indoors. Daniel hovered just behind her, shoulders tight, hands shoved into his coat pockets. He looked smaller here, like the walls were pressing in on him. You don't have to, he said quietly. Renee didn't answer. If she spoke right then, her voice might betray her. The front desk sat beneath a flickering fluorescent light. A man in his late 20s leaned on one elbow, scrolling through his phone. He glanced up, eyes moving quickly from Renee to Daniel, then back again. His face didn't change. That somehow made it worse. Can I help you? He asked. Renee stepped forward. Room. 1 week. The clerk straightened slightly. ID. Daniel shifted. Renee felt it beside her, the tension sharpening. I've got it, she said quickly, reaching into her bag. She slid her driver's license across the counter. Her hands were steady. She noticed that too. The clerk typed, asked questions, didn't look at Daniel once more than necessary. Renee answered everything. Single bed. No smoking. Cash deposit plus card. When he named the total, Renee felt it land in her chest like a weight. She didn't react. She took out her debit card and placed it on the counter. Daniel's hand shot out, hovering over her wrist. He stopped himself before touching her. No, he said. Renee, I can't let you. She met his eyes. I already decided. That's too much money. I know exactly how much it is. The clerk cleared his throat, uncomfortable. Renee slid the card closer. Please, she said. The transaction went through with a soft beep. That sound echoed louder than it should have. The clerk handed over a key card and a folded receipt. 3rd floor. Elevators slow. Renee nodded and turned toward Daniel. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Daniel took the card. His fingers shook. I'll pay you back, he said, voice low. Every cent. Renee shook her head. Just get some sleep. The elevator groaned its way upward. Renee stood stiffly beside him, staring at the floor numbers lighting up one by one. Daniel leaned against the wall, eyes closed, breathing shallow but steady. When the doors opened, the hallway stretched out ahead of them, carpet worn thin in places, walls scuffed by years of passing bodies. Room 317. Renee stopped at the door. I won't come in, she said. Daniel nodded. Thank you. For everything. She hesitated, then added, I'll check on you tomorrow. He looked surprised. Then something like relief softened his face. Inside the room, the bed was neatly made. A small TV bolted to the wall. A bathroom light humming faintly. It wasn't much, but it was inside. Renee watched Daniel step over the threshold, watched him pause just inside the doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be there. He turned once more. "I won't forget this," he said. She forced a smile. "Just rest." She left before he could say anything else. Outside, the cold hit her hard like punishment. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, staring at the hotel sign blinking against the gray sky. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A low-balance alert. She silenced it without looking. The walk to the bus stop felt longer than usual. Each step echoed with numbers she couldn't ignore now. Rent. Groceries. Caleb's field trip fee he hadn't mentioned yet but would soon. On the bus ride home, she stared out the window, watching snow gather along the curb. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, eyes tired but clear. At home, Caleb was already asleep. His door cracked open, light spilling from the hallway. Renee stood there for a moment, watching his chest rise and fall. She sat at the kitchen table and pulled out her notebook, the one she used to track expenses. She wrote the hotel amount down carefully, then circled it once. Her hand hovered over the page. "You're fine," she whispered. "It's temporary." The dryers downstairs kicked on again, their steady thump filling the apartment. Renee lay on the couch that night, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the day settling slowly into her bones. She thought about Daniel in the hotel room. Warm. Lying down. Breathing without fighting for it. She also thought about the balance in her account. Those two thoughts collided and stayed there. Because helping someone was one thing. Living with what came after was another. Renee returned to the hotel the next morning with a paper bag in her hand and sleep still clinging to her eyes. She told herself it was practical. Just checking. Making sure he hadn't gotten sick overnight, that the room hadn't turned into something else entirely. People disappeared in places like that. Quietly. Without paperwork. The lobby looked the same as it had the day before. Same smell. Same flickering light. The clerk from the night shift was gone, replaced by a woman with tired eyes and a neat ponytail. She glanced up as Renee walked past but didn't stop her. The elevator took its time. On the third floor, Renee followed the faded numbers down the hallway until she reached 317. She knocked lightly, then waited. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. The door opened partway. Daniel stood there, hair damp, beard trimmed shorter than before. His eyes looked clearer. Less glassy. He wore the same clothes, but they looked different now. Cleaner. Less weighed down. "Morning," he said. Renee let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "You look better?" He smiled, a little embarrassed. "Hot water helps." She held up the bag. "Breakfast." He stepped aside. "Come in." She hesitated, then crossed the threshold. The room smelled faintly of soap and something stale underneath it. The bed was rumpled but clearly used. A towel hung over the bathroom door. Proof of life. Proof of rest. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed while Renee leaned against the wall, not wanting to take up too much space. He opened the bag carefully. "Eggs. Toast. A banana." "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know," she replied. He ate slowly, like his body needed time to trust the food. Renee watched without staring, listening to the hum of the heater kick on and off. "I slept," he said after a while. Didn't realize how long it had been. She nodded. "Your body keeps score." He glanced at her. "You sound like someone who knows that." She didn't answer. After breakfast, Daniel cleared his throat. "I went down this morning. Asked about extending the room." Her stomach tightened. "And?" "They quoted me the rate," he said. I laughed. She sighed. "We'll figure something out." He looked at her sharply. "No. We'll figure something out means you figuring it out." She met his gaze. "I can handle a week." That's not the same as should. They held eye contact for a long moment, neither willing to back down. "I'll find work," he said finally. "Temporary. Something." She nodded. "Good." He paused. "You don't trust me." "That's not it," she said. "I don't trust the world." He smiled faintly at that. As she stood to leave, he said, "You ever notice how fast people change when they get a door to close?" She glanced back. "What do you mean?" "Out there," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the street, "you're always on guard. And here your shoulders drop. You remember what it feels like to be a person." The words hit closer than she expected. On her way out, Renee stopped at the front desk. "Is there a laundromat?" she asked. The clerk pointed down the hall. "Basement. Coin-operated." Renee thanked her and made a mental note. Over the next few days, the routine shifted. Renee stopped by every other morning with coffee or food. Daniel rested. He shaved properly. He started walking further each day, testing his strength. The cough softened, though it didn't vanish. One afternoon, Renee found him sitting at the small desk, writing something on hotel stationery. "What's that?" she asked. He glanced up, then folded the paper quickly. "Nothing important." She raised an eyebrow. "That's usually a lie." He smiled. "Maybe." They talked more now. About books. About music. About the strange things people left behind in hotel rooms. He still avoided details about his past, steering conversations away when they drifted too close. Renee noticed. She let him. At home, the cost started to show. Renee skipped lunch. Took extra shifts when she could. The grocery store manager asked if she was okay. She said yes. She always did. Caleb noticed anyway. "You're not eating," he said one night. "I ate at work." He looked unconvinced. By the fifth day, Daniel stood a little straighter. He laughed more easily. The color had returned to his face. But something else had changed too. He watched Renee differently now. Not with gratitude alone. With concern. "You're tired," he said one morning as she set a coffee down. "So are you." He didn't smile this time. "I don't like this balance," he said quietly. "Me taking. You giving." Renee picked up her bag. "Then get stronger." He nodded. "I am." As she walked out, she felt it again. That tug behind her ribs. The sense that something was building beneath the surface. Because rest didn't erase the past. And it didn't prevent the future from arriving all at once. By the end of the week, Renee could feel the cost in her body before she ever checked her bank account. Her legs ached more than usual. Her head throbbed in that dull, persistent way that came from skipping meals and sleeping in pieces. She moved through her shifts on instinct, letting muscle memory carry her when her thoughts grew too heavy. At the office building, she wiped down desks that belonged to people who would never know her name. She emptied trash cans filled with untouched lunches and glossy brochures advertising leadership retreats. The irony wasn't lost on her. It just didn't have room to matter. During her break, she checked her phone. The balance stared back at her. Smaller than she'd hoped. Larger than she'd feared. For now. She locked the screen and tucked the phone away as if hiding it might slow the numbers from changing. After work, she stopped by the hotel. She told herself she was only going to drop off coffee. Nothing more. Daniel answered the door with his coat on. "Heading out," he said. She frowned. "Where?" "Warehouse on the west side. Temporary gig. Loading trucks." Her relief was immediate and unwanted. "That's good. It's early hours," he added. "Cash." She nodded. "Be careful." He smiled. "Always." As he passed her in the hallway, she caught the faint scent of soap again. Clean. Human. It eased something in her chest, even as it tightened something else. At home that night, Caleb was waiting for her. He sat at the table, arms crossed, papers spread out in front of him like evidence. Scholarship forms. A printout of SAT dates. "You didn't tell me about the hotel," he said. Renee froze halfway through setting her bag down. "What hotel?" He looked up, eyes sharp. "Don't?" She exhaled slowly and sat across from him. "How do you know?" "I saw the charge," he said. "I needed the card for my bus pass. It popped up." Silence settled between them, thick and uncomfortable. "He was sick," she said finally. "He needed somewhere warm. And now we don't?" Caleb shot back. The words stung more than she expected. "We're okay," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "For how long?" he asked. "You keep saying temporary like that makes it safe." Renee rubbed her temples. You think I don't know what this costs? I think you always decide alone, he said. And then we live with it together. That landed. Art. She pushed her chair back and stood. I'm doing the best I can. I know, Caleb said softly. That's what scares me. She went to bed without another word, the argument echoing in her head long after the lights went out. The next morning Renee overslept. Her alarm didn't go off. Or maybe it did and she turned it off without realizing it. Either way, she woke to sunlight instead of gray dawn. Panic jolted her awake. She rushed through her routine, skipping coffee, skipping breakfast. The bus was late. Everything felt off. When she reached the cafe, she didn't stop. She crossed the street directly. Daniel wasn't there. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. She checked her watch. Then the corner. Then the boarded-up pharmacy. Nothing. She waited. 5 minutes. 10. The wind cut through her coat. Her fingers numbed. She told herself he was working. That he'd said he would be. Still, unease crept in. She went to work with the feeling riding her shoulders all morning. Every cough she heard in the hallway made her flinch. Every time her phone buzzed, her stomach dropped. At noon she checked it. No messages. After her shift, she didn't go straight home. She went to the hotel. The clerk recognized her now. Looking for someone? Room 317, Renee said. Is he back yet? The clerk shook her head. Haven't seen him. Renee nodded, thanked her, and turned away before her worry showed. Outside, the sky darkened earlier than it should have. Snow threatened again. She stood on the sidewalk, staring up at the hotel windows, wondering how quickly warmth could vanish. Because when you start helping someone carry their weight, you feel it immediately when that weight shifts. And Renee had the sinking sense that something was about to slip out of her hands. Daniel didn't come back that night. Renee checked the clock more times than she could count. Each glance made her chest tighten a little more. 9 o'clock. 10. Nearly midnight. She sat on the edge of the couch, coat still on, listening to the dryer's thump below her like a warning she couldn't turn off. Caleb was in his room, door closed. She could hear the faint sound of music through his headphones. She was grateful for it. It meant he wasn't watching her worry. By 12:30 she stood and grabbed her keys. She didn't tell herself she was panicking. She told herself she was being practical. If something had happened, it was better to know sooner. The streets were quieter than usual, snow muffling sound. Renee walked past the cafe, past the boarded-up pharmacy. She checked the corner first, then the alley beside it. Empty. A man sweeping outside a late-night diner shook his head when she asked if he'd seen anyone matching Daniel's description. No, he said. Lot of folks out here, though. She thanked him and kept walking. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. She snatched it out, heart jumping, then deflated when she saw it was just a low battery warning. At the hotel, the night clerk looked up as she approached the desk. He's not back, Renee said before the clerk could speak. The woman glanced at the logbook. Haven't seen him since this afternoon. Did he say where he was going? The clerk shook her head. People don't usually. Renee nodded. She knew that. It didn't help. She rode the elevator up anyway, stood outside room 317 and knocked lightly. Once. Twice. Nothing. She rested her forehead briefly against the door, then straightened. This wasn't helping. Outside again, the cold cut sharper. Snow began to fall, thin and fast. Renee stood under a flickering streetlight and stared down the block. Her mind ran through possibilities she didn't want to name. Injury. Illness. Trouble that came from being in the wrong place too long. She thought of his cough. Of the way he'd moved more confidently that morning, like progress was something fragile that could still be lost. At home, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The laundromat was quieter now, the dryers finally slowing. Without the noise, her thoughts grew louder. She replayed every conversation, every look she might have missed. She wondered if she'd pushed him too hard to find work. If he'd taken on more than he could handle. Just before dawn, her phone buzzed. Her heart slammed. A text. A known number. Renee. It's Daniel. I'm okay. She sat up so fast the blanket fell to the floor. Where are you? she typed back, fingers shaking. Pause. Long enough to hurt. Hospital. Don't come. I'll explain. Her chest tightened. What happened? Another pause. Just tired, came the reply. Didn't want to worry you. She stared at the screen, anger and relief colliding in her chest. You already did, she typed. She didn't sleep after that. In the morning, she went to work on autopilot. Her supervisor mentioned something about schedule changes next month. Renee nodded, not really hearing it. At lunch, she checked her phone again. No new messages. After her shift, she went straight to the hospital anyway. The emergency department smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. Renee scanned the waiting room, heart pounding, until she spotted him. Daniel sat hunched in a plastic chair, and four taped to his arm, his face drawn but awake. He looked up when he saw her and sighed. I told you not to come. She crossed the room in 3 long strides. You don't get to disappear and then give instructions. He smiled weakly. Fair. She sat beside him, arms crossed tight. What happened? Collapsed at work, he said. Nothing dramatic. Just pushed too hard. Her jaw clenched. You could have died. Didn't, he replied softly. She looked at him, then really looked. The exhaustion. The stubbornness. The man who hated being helped but needed it anyway. She stood abruptly. I'm not doing this halfway anymore. He frowned. What does that mean? Renee stared at the beige hospital wall, then back at him. It means, she said slowly, we need a better plan. And she had no idea yet how much that plan was going to cost her. The discharge papers took longer than the doctor. Renee sat beside Daniel in a narrow hallway, watching nurses weave past with clipboards and tired eyes. The doctor had spoken quickly, clinically. Dehydration. Exhaustion. Untreated infection that hadn't fully cleared. Nothing life-threatening as long as he slowed down. Easier said than done, Daniel had muttered. Now he stared at the floor, jaw tight, like the word slow offended him. You can't go back to that warehouse, Renee said quietly. I need the money. You need rest. He looked at her then. Really looked. You don't get to decide that. Her mouth tightened. I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to keep you alive. The words hung between them, heavier than she meant them to be. He exhaled and leaned back in his chair. I don't want to be your responsibility. You're not, she said automatically. He raised an eyebrow. Then why does it feel like I am? She didn't answer. When they finally left, the air outside felt sharper than before. The snow had stopped, but the sidewalks were slick and gray. Renee walked him back toward the hotel in silence, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts. At the front desk, the clerk slid the room key across without comment. Renee caught the way Daniel hesitated before taking it. You staying? He asked. No, she said. I should get home. He nodded, then paused. Thank you for coming. She gave a small smile. Don't scare me like that again. I'll try. On the bus ride home, Renee replayed the day in her head. Not just the hospital. The look on Daniel's face when she'd said better plan. The way Caleb had looked at her the night before, equal parts fear and disappointment. When she walked into the apartment, Caleb was at the stove, stirring something that smelled faintly burnt. You cooked? She asked. He shrugged. Attempted. She set her bag down. How was school? Fine. That was never true when he said it like that. They ate in silence, the clink of forks louder than it should have been. After a few minutes, Caleb spoke. Did you find him? Yes. Is he okay? He will be. Caleb nodded slowly. And us. Renee looked up. What do you mean? I mean, he said, choosing his words carefully, are we okay? She wanted to reassure him. To say everything was under control. Instead, she told the truth. I don't know yet. That night, after Caleb went to bed, Renee spread her bills across the table. Rent. Utilities. A notice from the bus company about a fare increase. She added numbers, erased them, added again. The hotel charges glared back at her. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. The next morning at work, something felt different. Not the building. Not the routine. The people. Conversations hushed when she walked by. Two supervisors stood near the elevators longer than usual, glancing at their phones. Her manager, Denise, asked her to clean the executive floor instead of her normal route. Renee frowned. Did someone call out? No, Denise said quickly. Just coverage. The executive floor always made Renee uneasy. The offices were quieter, the carpets thicker, the silence heavier. She worked methodically, vacuuming, wiping glass walls that reflected her back at herself. In one office, a framed photo caught her eye. A man standing in front of a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Well-dressed. Confident. The nameplate on the desk read, D. Whitaker. Renee froze. The last name tugged at her memory. Daniel had mentioned it once, casually, like it didn't matter. A family name. A past job. She shook her head. Coincidence, she told herself. Lots of Whitakers in the world. Still, her hands trembled slightly as she finished the room. At lunch, she checked her phone. A message from Daniel. Hotel manager says they need payment by Friday. I'll figure it out. Her stomach dropped. She typed back. Don't. I'll handle it. A few seconds passed. Renee, no. She didn't respond. That afternoon, Denise called her into the office. We're having some changes, Denise said, folding her hands. Nothing bad. Just evaluations. Renee nodded, heart thudding. Upper management is paying attention lately. Why? Renee asked. Denise hesitated. I don't know. But Renee had the uncomfortable sense that someone did. And that somehow her quiet choices were no longer invisible. By Thursday morning, the building felt tighter. Renee noticed it as soon as she stepped off the bus. The glass doors reflected a version of herself she barely recognized, eyes tired, shoulders tense, jaw set like she was bracing for impact. Inside, the lobby buzzed with a low, restless energy. People moved faster. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. She signed in and grabbed her cart. Morning, she said to Gerald from maintenance. He gave her a look that lingered half a second too long. Big day. For what? She asked. He shrugged. You'll see. That didn't help. As she worked her way through the lower floors, the unease followed her. Denise passed her twice, phone pressed to her ear both times, voice hushed. A group of executives she didn't recognize stepped out of the elevator on the 10th floor, suits sharp, expressions unreadable. When Renee reached the executive level again, Denise was waiting. They want you to start here today, she said. Full shift. Renee glanced at her usual route sheet. This isn't my assignment. I know, Denise said quickly. Just do it, okay? Renee nodded, though her chest tightened. She moved slower than usual, partly from fatigue, partly from the weight of being watched. The glass walls offered no privacy. She felt exposed, like a shadow that had stepped too far into the light. In the office with the Whitaker nameplate, the door stood open. Someone was inside. Renee hesitated, then pushed her cart forward. The man stood near the window, back turned, phone at his ear. His posture was straighter than she remembered. The coat was gone. The hair neatly combed. He wore a dark sweater and slacks that fit him easily, like he'd never worn anything else. She froze. He turned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel's expression shifted first. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something more controlled. Guarded. Renee, he said. Her grip tightened on the cart handle. What is this? He glanced toward the open door, then back at her. We should talk. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. You work here? Yes. The word landed heavy. She shook her head slowly. You said you were looking for work. You said. I said I needed time, he replied. I didn't lie. Her laugh came out sharp and humorless. You let me pay for your room. His jaw tightened. I didn't ask you to. You didn't stop me. Silence stretched between them. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Renee became suddenly aware of where she was. Of who she was. Of how this looked. I can't do this right now, she said, backing away. Renee. She turned and walked out before he could finish. In the supply closet, she pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes. Her hands shook. Anger surged first, hot and fast, followed by something colder. betrayal, embarrassment, a deep, aching confusion. She thought of every conversation, every moment he'd stayed quiet when he could have spoken, every time she defended him in her head. She swallowed hard and went back to work. By lunchtime, the story had already shifted. People looked at her differently, some with curiosity, some with sympathy. No one said anything outright, but she could feel the questions. She didn't check her phone. When her shift ended, Denise stopped her at the time clock. "Before you go," Denise said carefully, "there's a meeting tomorrow morning. All staff. Mandatory." Renee nodded. "About what?" Denise hesitated. "Leadership." At home, Caleb noticed immediately. "You look like you saw a ghost," he said. Renee dropped her bag and sank into a chair. "What if someone you trusted wasn't who you thought they were?" He studied her face. "Did they hurt you?" She shook her head. "No." "Then what?" She struggled for words. "They let me believe something that wasn't true." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Why?" "I don't know." Later that night, her phone buzzed. "Daniel." She stared at the screen, then set it face down. A few minutes later, another message came through. "I never meant to put you in that position." She typed back before she could stop herself. "Then why did you?" The response took longer this time. "Because I needed to know who I was without everything else." Her chest tightened. "And I was part of that experiment?" "No," he wrote. "You were the only real thing in it." Renee set the phone down again. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. The world kept moving, indifferent to her unraveling understanding of it. Tomorrow everyone would know more. And Renee had the sinking feeling that when the truth came out fully, it wouldn't just change how she saw Daniel. It would change how the building saw her. The meeting room filled faster than Renee expected. Rows of metal chairs scraped softly against the floor as people settled in. Conversations buzzed low and cautious, like everyone was afraid of being overheard. Renee chose a seat near the aisle, close enough to leave quickly if she needed to. Denise stood near the front, hands clasped, eyes flicking toward the door every few seconds. Renee kept her gaze forward. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel standing in that office. Not the man from the cafe corner. Not the one who counted coins at the convenience store. This version wore authority like it belonged to him. The door opened. The room quieted almost instantly. 3 executives walked in. 2 women Renee didn't recognize, followed by Daniel. He looked different again. Not just dressed differently. More composed. The softness she'd grown used to was tucked away behind something firmer. Renee felt heat crawl up her neck. Daniel stepped to the podium. His eyes swept the room once, briefly, then settled somewhere just past her. If he noticed her, he didn't show it. "Good morning," he said. His voice carried easily. "Come." Confident. "I appreciate everyone being here on short notice." Renee's stomach twisted. "This company has gone through a lot of transitions over the past year," Daniel continued. "Some visible, some not." A murmur rippled through the room. "I've spent the last few months observing operations from different angles," he said. "Not just numbers and reports. People." Renee's hands clenched in her lap. He spoke about efficiency, about culture, about gaps between leadership and labor. The words were careful, measured. Not unkind, but distant. "I'll be stepping into an interim leadership role effective immediately," Daniel said. "My focus will be accountability and listening." Applause followed, polite, uncertain. Renee didn't clap. Her ears rang. Interim leadership. Observing from different angles. People. She felt exposed, like every choice she'd made was suddenly under a spotlight. After the meeting, the room emptied slowly. Groups formed, whispers rising and falling. Renee stayed seated until Denise approached. "You okay?" Denise asked quietly. Renee nodded, though her throat felt tight. "I need air." Outside, the cold hit her hard. She stood near the loading dock, breathing in exhaust and winter air, trying to steady herself. Footsteps approached. "I was hoping you wouldn't leave yet," Daniel said. She didn't turn. "You didn't tell me." "No." "You didn't correct me." "No." Why? Her voice came out flatter than she felt. He stepped closer but kept a careful distance. Because if people knew who I was, they would behave differently. Including you. She laughed softly, bitter. You think I'd treat you worse if I knew? No, he said. I think you'd treat me carefully. And I needed honesty. She turned then, eyes flashing. So you let me think you had nothing. I let you see me without the armor, he replied. And you watched me struggle, she shot back. You watched me pay for things I couldn't afford. His jaw tightened. I saw generosity, not obligation. That's convenient, she said. He hesitated. I reimbursed the hotel. Her breath caught. What? I paid the balance this morning. Quietly. That doesn't undo it. I know. They stood there in silence, the space between them charged and uncomfortable. You embarrassed me, Renee said finally. Whether you meant to or not. I never wanted that. Well, she said, intention doesn't erase impact. He nodded slowly. You're right. She expected anger, defensiveness. Instead he looked tired. I'm stepping back from direct oversight of your department, he said. Effective immediately. Her chest tightened. Why? Because power complicates things, he said. And I don't want yours questioned. She studied his face, searching for manipulation. She didn't find it. Just restraint. Is that all? She asked. For now. At home that night, Caleb listened quietly as she explained. Not everything. Just enough. So he was testing people? Caleb asked. In a way. And you passed. Renee exhaled. I don't know what that even means. Caleb leaned back in his chair. Sounds like he learned something. Doesn't mean you owe him anything. I know. But knowing didn't settle the knot in her chest. Later, alone, Renee checked her email. A message from HR sat unread. Subject line, request for meeting. Her pulse quickened. She opened it. The message was brief, formal. Tomorrow morning. Private discussion. No explanation. Renee closed the laptop slowly. Whatever Daniel had learned, whatever he thought he was protecting her from, something else was moving now. And she had the uneasy sense that the next truth wouldn't come from him at all. Renee arrived early. The HR office sat on the quiet side of the building, away from the main flow of desks and conference rooms. The hallway smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and burnt coffee. She sat in one of the molded plastic chairs outside the door, hands folded in her lap, posture careful. Waiting had become something she was good at. A woman opened the door and smiled politely. Renee Collins? Renee stood. That's me. Inside, the room was smaller than she expected. Neutral walls. A round table. 2 chairs. The woman introduced herself as Karen from Human Resources and gestured for Renee to sit. This won't take long, Karen said. I want to start by saying this isn't disciplinary. Renee nodded, though her shoulders stayed tight. Karen slid a folder across the table. We've received some feedback. Concerns mostly. About my work? Renee asked. No, Karen said. About boundaries. The word landed heavy. Karen continued, voice calm and practiced. There's been discussion about your interaction with senior leadership prior to the announcement yesterday. Renee felt heat rise in her face. I didn't know who he was. We understand that, Karen said. But perception matters. Perception of what? Renee asked, struggling to keep her voice even. That you may have received preferential treatment, Karen said gently. Renee let out a short laugh before she could stop herself. I clean offices at night. I take 2 buses to get here. I paid for a hotel room I couldn't afford. What part of that looks preferential? Karen's smile thinned. I'm not questioning your integrity, but when power dynamics become blurred, it raises flags. Renee leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. So what happens now? We're documenting the conversation, Karen said. And we're offering you the option to transfer to a different building. Same pay. Different leadership. Renee stared at the folder. Transfer. New route. New supervisors. A fresh start she hadn't asked for. Is this mandatory? She asked. No, Karen said. But it may be easier. Easier for who went unsaid. I need time, Renee said. Of course, Karen replied. Take the day. Renee left the office with the folder tucked under her arm, feeling smaller than when she'd walked in. Around her, the building hummed on, indifferent. People laughed near the elevators. Someone argued quietly on a phone call. Life went on. She stepped outside and sat on the concrete steps, the cold seeping through her coat. Her phone buzzed. Daniel. She didn't open the message. A second buzz followed. Then a third. Finally she looked. I heard about HR, he'd written. I'm sorry. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. Renee stared at the screen. Then typed. They offered me a transfer. Pause. That wasn't my intention, Daniel replied. I can push back. Her fingers hovered. Please don't. Another pause. Longer this time. Are you okay? He asked. She considered the question. I don't know. She stood and walked until the building was behind her. The city noise grew louder. A bus roared past, spraying dirty slush onto the curb. At home, Caleb was already there, backpack dropped by the door. Why are you home? He asked. She set the folder on the table. HR. He read her face carefully. That bad. They think I crossed a line, she said, without knowing where it was. Caleb frowned. That's not fair. No, she agreed. But it's how it works. He picked up the folder and skimmed it. Are you going to take it? I don't know, she said again. The phrase felt worn thin. That evening her phone rang. Daniel. She hesitated, then answered. I won't keep calling if you don't want me to, he said immediately. I need you to know I never meant for this to land on you. I believe that, Renee said quietly. But believing it doesn't fix anything, she replied. I still have to live with the fallout. He exhaled. What can I do? She looked around her apartment. The chipped paint. The sagging couch. Caleb's textbook stacked neatly by the wall. You can stop trying to fix this, she said, and let me decide what I need. There was a beat of silence. Okay, Daniel said. I'll respect that. They hung up. Later, lying in bed, Renee stared at the ceiling. She thought about the transfer. About starting over. About how easily her quiet life had been disrupted by a kindness she hadn't planned. She also thought about something Karen had said. Perception matters. Tomorrow she'd have to choose which perception she was willing to live with. And she wasn't sure any of them belonged to her anymore. Renee didn't sleep much that night. She lay on her side, listening to the building settle, the distant hum of traffic bleeding through thin walls. Every time she closed her eyes, the word transfer surfaced again, floating up like a buoy she wasn't sure she wanted to grab. In the morning she dressed slowly. Careful movements. Familiar routine. She lingered longer than usual in front of the mirror, smoothing her hair, adjusting her jacket. Not vanity. Armor. Caleb watched her from the doorway. You're thinking again. She smiled faintly. I never stopped. On the bus ride to work, she reread the HR email. Same words. Same polite distance. Options presented as kindness. At the building, Denise met her near the supply closet. I heard, Denise said quietly. Renee nodded. News travels fast. Denise hesitated. For what it's worth, I told them you're solid. Always have been. Thank you. They stood there a moment longer than necessary, the unsaid hanging between them. Renee worked her shift with a strange clarity. Every task felt sharper, more deliberate. She noticed things she usually ignored. The way fingerprints smeared glass almost immediately after she wiped it. The faint hum of electricity behind walls. The way people avoided eye contact when they thought she might know something they didn't. Midway through the afternoon, her phone vibrated. A text from an unfamiliar number. This is Karen from HR. Just checking in. Let me know if you'd like to discuss next steps. Renee didn't reply. She finished her route, clocked out, and walked past the lobby without slowing. Outside, the air felt heavier, damp with the promise of rain. She didn't go home. Instead, she took the bus downtown, riding until the stops grew unfamiliar. She got off near the river and walked, letting the cold wind sting her cheeks. Daniel found her there. She hadn't told him where she was, but part of her wasn't surprised when she heard her name. Renee. She turned slowly. He stood a few steps back, hands in his coat pockets, expression careful. I said I needed space, she said. I know, he replied. I didn't come to argue. Just to listen. She studied him for a long moment. Then she gestured toward a nearby bench. You can sit. They didn't speak right away. The river moved dark and steady beside them. You know what hurts the most? Renee said finally. Not that you have power. Not even that you hid it. It's that now everything I do gets filtered through you. Daniel nodded. I thought anonymity would protect that. It didn't, she said. It stripped it. He winced slightly. You're right. She folded her arms tighter. HR thinks I crossed a line. People think I got special access. And I keep wondering if they're going to start looking for reasons to prove it. They shouldn't, he said. But they will, she replied. That's how this works. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. If you take the transfer. I don't want to run, she cut in. But I also don't want to stay somewhere I'm constantly watched. Silence stretched again. I can make a statement, Daniel said slowly. Clarify things. Renee shook her head. That just centers you more. He sighed. Then tell me what you need. She looked out at the water. I need to know this ends. One way or another. He turned to her. What do you mean? I mean I can't keep living in this gray space, she said. Not at work. Not with you. His jaw tightened. Are you saying? I'm saying something has to change, she replied. And it can't be me shrinking. He nodded, accepting the boundary even as it landed heavy. They stood together for a moment before parting without a hug, without a promise. That evening, Renee sat at the kitchen table with the folder open in front of her. Caleb leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. Well, he asked. She took a breath. I'm going to HR tomorrow. To accept it? No, she said. To ask questions. He smiled slightly. That's my mom. She smiled back briefly. Later, as she prepared for bed, her phone buzzed once more. An email notification. From HR. Subject line. Additional information. Her pulse quickened as she opened it. The message was short. Formal. It mentioned a complaint. Anonymous. It referenced conduct, timing, and an internal review. Renee sat down on the edge of the bed, the room suddenly very quiet. Someone hadn't just noticed her. Someone had reported her. And whatever happened next was no longer in her control. Renee woke before her alarm. The gray light outside the window told her it was barely morning. Her chest felt tight, like she'd been holding her breath all night without realizing it. The email replayed in her mind. Anonymous complaint. Internal review. She moved quietly through the apartment, not wanting to wake Caleb. Coffee tasted bitter. Toast went untouched. At work, the building felt colder. She hadn't even clocked in when Karen from HR appeared in the hallway. Renee, she said gently. Can we talk? Renee nodded, setting her card aside. The conference room this time was larger. 2 chairs on one side of the table. 3 on the other. A man in a suit sat beside Karen, hands folded neatly. He introduced himself as compliance. This is informal, he said. We're just gathering context. Renee clasped her hands together to keep them from shaking. Karen spoke first. We received a complaint alleging inappropriate personal involvement with a member of senior leadership prior to their appointment. Renee swallowed. I didn't know who he was. That's been noted, the man said. But the complaint suggests you may have benefited materially. Benefited how? Renee asked. Hotel accommodations, Karen said carefully. Meals. Transportation. Renee let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I paid for those. The man glanced at Karen. Do you have documentation? Yes, Renee said. Bank statements. Receipts. Karen nodded. We'll need copies. Renee leaned forward. Who filed the complaint? I'm afraid we can't disclose that, Karen replied. Is it someone I work with? Renee asked. Potentially. That landed harder than she expected. The compliance officer closed his notebook. This process takes time. In the meantime, we recommend limiting contact with senior leadership. Renee's voice was steady when she replied. That won't be difficult. After the meeting, she went to the restroom and locked herself in a stall. Her hands shook as she pressed them to her face. Someone had watched her. Someone had decided her kindness looked like leverage. She returned to work and focused on small, concrete tasks. Emptying bins. Refilling soap. Anything that kept her moving. At lunch, Denise sat beside her, unusually quiet. People are talking, Denise said finally. Not specifics. Just tone. Renee nodded. I figured. I don't think this came from upstairs, Denise added. Feels closer. Renee thought of the way eyes had lingered on her lately. The pauses. The half-smiles. That afternoon her phone buzzed. Daniel. She didn't open it. By the time she got home, the tension had settled into her bones. Caleb noticed immediately. Something happened, he said. She handed him the email, then explained. They think I used him, Caleb said slowly. They think I benefited, Renee corrected. That's messed up. Yes, she agreed. Caleb sat across from her. Did you? She met his eyes. No. Then fight it. I am, she said. But I don't get to choose the battlefield. That night, Daniel came anyway. There was a knock at the door. Renee hesitated, then opened it. He stood there, eyes tired. I heard. From who? She asked. HR looped me in, he said. As a precaution. Her chest tightened. Of course they did. I want to cooperate fully, he said. I told them everything. Everything? She asked. Yes. She stepped aside to let him in, then immediately regretted it. What exactly did you tell them? She asked. That we met before my appointment, he said. That you helped me. That I didn't disclose my identity. And did you tell them why? He hesitated. Renee's jaw tightened. Daniel. I told them I was conducting informal observation, he said finally. The word observation echoed in the room. You turned my life into a case study, she said quietly. That wasn't my intent. But that's how it reads, she replied. He ran a hand through his hair. I can take responsibility. Publicly if needed. That won't erase the suspicion, she said. It just reframes it. He looked at her, conflicted. What do you want from me? She thought of the stalls. The questions. The feeling of being weighed by people who didn't know her. I want the truth on record, she said. Not your version. Mine. He nodded slowly. Then I'll back you. They stood in silence. Outside, a car horn blared, sharp and brief. This isn't over, Renee said. No, Daniel agreed. It's just starting. And for the first time since this began, Renee realized the second twist wasn't about who Daniel was. It was about who was willing to turn her generosity into evidence. And she didn't yet know how deep that went. The review stretched into its second week. Renee learned quickly that waiting under suspicion felt different than waiting for answers. Time moved strangely. Some moments crawled, thick with anticipation. Others vanished entirely, swallowed by routine. At work, she was cordial but careful. Conversations stayed surface level. Breaks were quieter. People who once complained freely now measured their words around her, as if proximity alone carried risk. Denise stopped sitting with her at lunch. Not abruptly. Not unkindly. Just gradually. A different chair. A different time. Renee didn't blame her. Fear was contagious. HR requested documents. Bank statements. Receipts. Text messages. Renee complied with everything. She printed records late into the night, highlighting dates, organizing timelines. Each page felt like a defense she shouldn't have needed to mount. Daniel kept his distance, just as the compliance officer had recommended. When they crossed paths in the building, it was brief. Professional. A nod. Nothing more. That restraint hurt more than anger would have. At home, Caleb tried to keep things normal. He talked about school. About a debate tournament. About a teacher who mispronounced his name for the third year in a row. Renee listened, grateful for the anchor. One evening as they ate dinner, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She ignored it. It buzzed again. She answered cautiously. Hello. Miss Collins, a woman said. This is Angela from the hotel on Grant Street. Renee's stomach dropped. Yes. We received a request from your company asking about your stay history. Renee stood slowly, moving away from the table. I didn't stay there. Yes, Angela said. But you paid for room 317 on multiple occasions. Renee closed her eyes. Did you give them information? We confirmed payment, Angela said carefully. Nothing more. Thank you for telling me, Renee said, voice tight. After she hung up, Caleb watched her closely. They checking on you? Yes. That night, Renee couldn't sleep at all. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the building creak. Her mind ran through worst-case scenarios. Suspension. Termination. A mark on her record that followed her quietly from job to job. The next day, Karen emailed. Subject line, follow-up interview. Renee arrived early again. Same room. Same table. This time, 2 additional people sat in. Karen's tone remained calm. Neutral. Almost kind. We've reviewed your documentation, she said. It supports your claim that you covered expenses. Renee nodded. I told you. Yes, Karen said. However, intent is still under review. Intent to do what? Renee asked. To influence, the compliance officer said. Or to receive influence. Renee leaned forward. I didn't know who he was. That's not being disputed, he replied. But perception. Perception keeps coming up, Renee interrupted. But perception doesn't pay my rent if you decide I'm a liability. Silence followed. Karen folded her hands. There is another element we need to discuss. Renee's chest tightened. What? A statement was submitted, Karen said. From a colleague. Renee's heart pounded. About what? About observing you entering and exiting the building with Mr. Whitaker outside of work hours, Karen said. And about comments you allegedly made regarding his role. Renee shook her head. I didn't know his role. And I never said anything. We're aware, Karen said. But the statement complicates matters. Who said it? Renee asked again. Karen met her eyes. It was submitted by Denise. The name hit like a physical blow. Renee sat back slowly, breath leaving her lungs. Denise. The one who'd vouched for her. The one who'd said she was solid. She told me she supported me, Renee said faintly. She may believe that, Karen said. But she also has obligations. Renee laughed quietly, a sound that surprised even her. So she protected herself. The compliance officer closed his folder. At this point, we're determining whether policy was violated. And if it was? Renee asked. Termination is on the table. The words landed cleanly. No drama. No cushioning. Renee stood. Then here's my statement. Everyone looked up. I helped someone because he was cold and sick, she said. I paid for it myself. I didn't gain access, advantage, or protection. If that's a violation, then say that plainly. Don't dress it up as impropriety. Karen looked unsettled. The compliance officer wrote something down. We'll be in touch, Karen said. Outside, Renee stood in the hallway, steadying herself against the wall. She didn't cry. She walked past Denise's office without looking in. At home that evening, she told Caleb everything. Denise reported you? He said, disbelief sharp in his voice. Yes. Why? Renee shook her head. Fear. Survival. Same reasons people do most things. Her phone buzzed. Daniel. She answered this time. They told me Denise filed a statement, he said quietly. Yes. I'm sorry, he said. This shouldn't cost you your job. It might, Renee replied. There was a pause. Then let me put something on the record. She stiffened. What? My identity, he said. And my intent. Fully. No ambiguity. That could hurt you. I know. She stared at the wall. If you do that, there's no going back. I'm aware. Renee closed her eyes. Somewhere in the building across town, decisions were being weighed. Reputations. Risk. Narrative. And for the first time, Renee realized the second twist wasn't just betrayal. It was this. The system didn't punish her for helping a stranger. It punished her for not knowing her place. And the final outcome was about to force everyone to choose where they stood. The hearing wasn't called that. HR referred to it as a final clarification meeting. A neat phrase. Polite. Like language alone could soften what was coming. Renee took the morning off. She ironed her jacket even though it didn't really need it. Ate half a banana she barely tasted. Caleb watched her from the doorway, worry written plainly on his face. "You want me to come?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not this one." The conference room was fuller than before. Karen sat at the table, the compliance officer beside her. Another man Renee hadn't seen before occupied the far end, older, grayer, with the calm stillness of someone used to deciding outcomes. Daniel was there too. Not at the table. Along the wall. Separate. That alone told her this was different. Karen began. "Thank you all for coming. We're here to resolve outstanding questions regarding conduct and disclosure." Renee kept her hands folded, posture straight. The older man spoke next. "Mr. Whitaker has requested to submit an addendum to the record." Daniel stepped forward. Renee felt her pulse spike. "I failed to disclose my identity intentionally," Daniel said. "Not to gain advantage, but to understand our operations from the ground level." The word ground landed with weight. "I interacted with Miss Collins before my appointment," he continued. "She was unaware of my role, my authority, or my affiliation with senior leadership." Karen nodded. "That's been established." "What hasn't," Daniel said, voice steady, "is the framing of her actions. Miss Collins did not seek influence. She did not request favors. She did not benefit from my position in any way." The compliance officer interjected. "Your testimony is noted, but..." Daniel raised a hand slightly. "I'm not finished." The room stilled. "I accepted assistance without correcting a misunderstanding," Daniel said. "That was my failure. Not hers." Renee's chest tightened. The older man leaned forward. "You're acknowledging a lapse in judgment." "Yes," Daniel said. "And I'm prepared to accept the consequences of that." A pause followed. Heavy. Calculated. Karen glanced at the compliance officer, then at Renee. "Miss Collins, is there anything you'd like to add?" Renee lifted her chin. "Only this. I didn't help him because I thought it would protect me. I helped him because he needed help. If that's a problem, then it's not my conduct you need to review. It's your values." Silence. The older man studied her carefully. Not unkindly. Not warmly either. "Thank you," he said finally. "We'll deliberate." They were asked to wait outside. Renee sat in the hallway, hands resting on her knees. Daniel stood a few feet away, eyes fixed on the floor. Minutes passed. Or maybe it was longer. Time felt slippery. When the door opened, Karen stepped out. "Miss Collins," she said. "You're cleared of wrongdoing." Renee's breath left her in a rush. "The complaint will not be substantiated," Karen continued. "Your record will reflect no violation." Renee nodded, throat tight. Karen turned to Daniel. "However, there will be recommendations regarding disclosure protocols." Daniel inclined his head. "Understood." They left separately. Outside, the sky was low and gray. Renee stood on the steps, breathing in cold air, grounding herself. Daniel approached cautiously. "I meant what I said." "I know," she replied. "I'm stepping back from the interim role," he added. "Effective immediately." She looked at him, startled. "Why?" "Because the way I entered this position caused harm," he said. "And because leadership without trust isn't leadership." She studied his face, searching for calculation. Found none. "That doesn't erase what happened," she said. "No," he agreed. "But it's a start." They stood there, the space between them no longer charged, just heavy with history. At home that evening, Caleb listened quietly as she told him. "So you're okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "For now." He smiled, relief clear. "Good." Later, alone, Renee sat by the window. The city lights flickered on one by one. She thought about Denise, about fear, about systems that bent easily toward power and pressed hard against vulnerability. She also thought about choice. The review was over, the accusation resolved. But something else remained unsettled. Because being cleared didn't mean being untouched. And tomorrow she would have to decide whether staying meant accepting a place that had already shown her how quickly it could turn. The story wasn't finished yet. It was simply waiting for its final shape. The building didn't celebrate her clearance. There was no announcement, no apology, no quiet acknowledgement that something had gone wrong. Renee returned to work the next morning under the same fluorescent lights, the same low hum of vents and elevators, as if the last few weeks had been a misunderstanding best left unspoken. People were polite again. That was the change. Too polite. Denise avoided her completely now. Not even a nod in the hallway. Renee noticed, accepted it, and moved on. She had learned something valuable about proximity and fear. About how easily loyalty bent when survival was at stake. By midweek, Karen emailed again. Subject line, transfer option update. Renee stared at the screen for a long moment before opening it. The offer still stood. Same pay. Different building. No explanation required. Choice framed as generosity. She printed the email and folded it carefully into her bag. That evening, she met Daniel for the first time since the hearing. Not at the building. Not near work. They sat in a small diner near the bus terminal, the kind with chipped mugs and a bell over the door that rang too loudly. I didn't expect you to say yes, Daniel admitted. I didn't expect to want to talk, Renee replied. They ordered coffee. Black for both. I'm leaving the company, Daniel said after a moment. Renee looked up. You already stepped back. Temporarily, he said. But it's not enough. The board wants a cleaner narrative. And I don't want to be one. She considered that. So what now? I'm starting something smaller, he said. Consulting. Independent oversight. Less insulation. She studied him. That sounds like starting over. It is. They sat quietly. You didn't have to do what you did, Renee said. At the hearing. I know, he replied. But I needed to. For yourself. For the truth, he said. And for you. She nodded slowly. Intent matters. But so does damage. I'm learning that. When they finished their coffee, they stood outside under the dim streetlight. I took the transfer, Renee said. Daniel's brows lifted slightly. Are you okay with that? I think so, she said. Staying would have meant pretending nothing happened. That's fair. She hesitated. It doesn't mean I forgive everything. I wouldn't expect you to. They exchanged a small, honest smile. Not a promise. Not closure. Just acknowledgement. The new building was smaller. Quieter. Fewer glass walls. Renee liked that. Her first day no one stared. No one whispered. She was just another employee learning a new route. At lunch, she sat alone and ate slowly, letting the normalcy settle. That night, at home, Caleb looked up from his homework. So? She smiled faintly. It's quieter. He grinned. Good. Later, Renee stood at the window again. She thought about the man she'd met on a cold sidewalk. About the man who'd stood in a boardroom and accepted blame. She also thought about herself. She hadn't been promoted. She hadn't been rewarded. She hadn't been punished either. What she'd gained was harder to measure. Clarity. Boundaries. A sharper sense of where she stood. The city outside kept moving, indifferent as ever. But for the first time in a long while, Renee felt like she was moving with it. Renee learned the rhythm of the new building slowly. It didn't announce itself the way the old one had. No towering glass lobby. No echoing footsteps. Just a low brick structure tucked between a clinic and a community college, its entrance scuffed by years of honest use. The floors weren't quieter exactly. They were simply less performative. She liked that. Her shifts settled into something steady. Predictable. She cleaned classrooms where students forgot notebooks and left half-finished thoughts scribbled on white boards. Offices where people argued softly about budgets and deadlines, then laughed 5 minutes later. It felt human in a way the other place never had. No one here knew her story. That mattered more than she'd expected. One afternoon, as she wiped down a row of desks, she paused at a chalkboard covered in a quote someone had written and never erased. It wasn't inspirational in the polished way. Just a sentence, uneven letters slanting to the right. Be careful who you become while trying to survive. Renee stood there longer than necessary, rag hanging loose in her hand. At home, life continued its quiet adjustments. Caleb got into a summer program he'd wanted. They celebrated with takeout and cheap sparkling cider, laughing when the cork popped too hard and soaked the ceiling. You deserved that, she told him. So did you, he replied without hesitation. That night, after Caleb went to bed, Renee checked her phone. There was a message from Daniel. Not recent. A few days old. I wanted to let you know I'm moving out of the city. Not running. Just choosing a different distance. I hope you're well. She stared at it for a long time before replying. I am, she typed. I hope you find what you're looking for. She didn't add anything else. Weeks passed. Summer leaned in. The city changed its sound. Windows opened. Sirens blended with laughter and music drifting up from sidewalks. Renee stopped thinking about the investigation every day. Then one day she realized she hadn't thought about it at all. That didn't mean it hadn't shaped her. She noticed now how systems moved. How easily suspicion slid downhill. How generosity, when it came from the wrong place, was treated like a disruption instead of a virtue. But she also noticed something else. She hadn't become smaller. She hadn't hardened either. One evening on her way home, she passed the same cafe corner where she'd first seen Daniel months ago. A different man stood there now, hunched against the breeze, eyes tired in a familiar way. Renee slowed. She hesitated. The world pressed in softly around her. Buses, voices, the constant movement of people surviving side by side. She reached into her bag, pulled out a few bills and walked over. Hey, she said gently. You okay? The man looked up, surprised. I'm all right, he said. Just trying. She nodded. There's a shelter 2 blocks over. Warm meals tonight. He studied her face, then the money she held out. Thank you. She placed it in his hand, closed his fingers over it briefly and stepped back. No names. No explanations. She walked away with her shoulders light, not because she expected anything in return, but because she knew exactly why she was doing it. At home, Caleb was on the couch, scrolling through his phone. You look tired, he said. I am, she replied. But it's the good kind. She sat beside him, the familiar comfort of the room settling around her. Later, as the night deepened, Renee stood at the window one last time. The city lights blinked steadily, imperfect and persistent. She thought about power. About kindness. About how easily one could be mistaken for the other if you weren't paying attention. She hadn't saved anyone. She hadn't been saved. She had simply chosen again and again who she was going to be. And if you've stayed with this story until now, maybe it's because you recognize something in that choice. In the quiet moments where character matters more than credit. So take that with you. Hold on to it. And if stories like this matter to you, stories about real people, real consequences, and the choices in between, then you already know what to do next.